Mother Bear blocked a security guard while nurses rescued a baby. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The old clock on the wall of Pine Valley Medical Center ticked past midnight as Nurse Melody Santos adjusted the blanket around the sleeping newborn in the nursery. The tiny baby girl had been born just 3 hours ago during a complicated delivery, and her mother was still recovering in the intensive care unit. Something about this birth felt different to Melody, though she couldn't put her finger on what exactly. Outside the hospital windows, the dense Montana forest pressed close to the building. The facility had been built years ago when the town was smaller, and now the wilderness seemed to creep closer each year. Most nights, the only sounds were the gentle hum of medical equipment and the occasional rustle of wind through pine trees. Security guard Ryan Blackwood made his usual rounds through the quiet corridors. At 35, he had worked at the hospital for nearly 8 years and knew every corner of the building. Tonight felt unusually still, even for the graveyard shift. He paused at the nursery window and smiled at Melody, who was documenting the baby's vital signs. "How's our little fighter doing?" Ryan asked softly through the intercom. "She's strong," Melody replied, glancing down at the infant. "But her mother lost a lot of blood. Dr. Harrison is still with her." Ryan nodded and continued his patrol toward the rear loading dock. The hospital's back entrance was surrounded by tall evergreens, and maintenance had recently reported some torn garbage bags near the dumpsters. Probably raccoons, he thought, but protocol required him to check anyway. As he pushed open the heavy metal door to the loading area, a strange scent hit him. It wasn't the usual smell of medical waste or cleaning supplies. This was something wild, musky, and unfamiliar. Ryan clicked on his flashlight and stepped outside. The beam of light swept across the concrete loading dock, revealing scattered food containers and what looked like large paw prints in the dirt near the dumpsters. Ryan's heart began to beat faster. These weren't raccoon prints. Inside the nursery, Melody noticed the baby becoming restless. The infant's tiny fists clenched and unclenched, and soft whimpering sounds escaped her lips. It was strange because the baby had been sleeping so peacefully just moments before. "What's wrong, little one?" Melody whispered, gently stroking the baby's forehead. Outside, Ryan followed the paw prints with his flashlight. They led from the forest edge directly to the hospital's back entrance. As he knelt to examine them more closely, a low, rumbling sound made him freeze. It was coming from somewhere behind the dumpsters. Ryan slowly stood up and aimed his flashlight toward the sound. 2 yellow eyes reflected back at him from the darkness, and his breath caught in his throat. Standing between the dumpsters and the hospital entrance was a massive black bear, easily 6 feet tall on her hind legs. But she wasn't alone. A small cub, no bigger than a house cat, cowered behind her massive form. The mother bear's ears were pinned back, and her lips were slightly pulled back, showing her teeth. She wasn't aggressive yet, but every muscle in her body was tense and ready. Ryan's hand slowly moved toward his radio, but as soon as he made the motion, the mother bear took a step forward and let out a warning grunt. She was blocking his path back to the hospital door, and Ryan suddenly realized he was trapped between her and the forest. Inside the hospital, Melody heard Ryan's voice crackle through the security radio system, but the words were unclear. She looked toward the window that faced the loading dock, but couldn't see anything in the darkness. "Unit 1 to base," Ryan's voice whispered through his radio. "I need backup at the rear entrance. We have a situation." The mother bear seemed to understand that the device in Ryan's hand was some form of communication. She moved closer, now less than 10 feet away, effectively cutting off any escape route. Her cub made a small crying sound, and the mother bear's protective instincts flared even stronger. Ryan had never been this close to a wild bear before. He could see the intelligence in her eyes, the way she calculated his every movement. This wasn't a random encounter. She was here for a reason, and she wasn't going to let him interfere with whatever that reason was. "Easy, Mama," Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't want to hurt you or your baby." The bear tilted her head slightly at the sound of his gentle tone, but she didn't move. Her massive paws remained planted firmly on the concrete, and her body stayed positioned between Ryan and the hospital entrance. In the nursery, the baby's whimpering grew stronger. Melody checked the monitors, but all the vital signs appeared normal. She picked up the infant and held her close, trying to soothe her with gentle rocking motions. "Shh, sweetie," Melody cooed. "Everything's okay." But as she said the words, Melody felt a strange uneasiness wash over her. The baby's distress seemed connected to something beyond the usual newborn fussiness. It was as if the child could sense danger that the adults couldn't yet understand. Outside, the standoff continued. Ryan noticed that the mother bear kept glancing toward the hospital windows, particularly toward the area where the nursery was located. Her behavior was unlike anything he'd heard about wild bears. She seemed focused, purposeful, as if she was guarding something specific. The cub ventured a few steps away from its mother, limping slightly on its front paw. Ryan could see now that the little one was injured, probably the reason they had come so close to human civilization in search of food. But why was the mother bear so determined to block the hospital entrance? And why did she keep looking toward the nursery windows with such intense focus? As these questions raced through Ryan's mind, he heard footsteps approaching from inside the hospital. Someone was coming to investigate his radio call, and he had no idea how the mother bear would react to more humans appearing on the scene. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been working a double shift in the emergency department when she heard Ryan's radio call. As the hospital's head of pediatrics, she was used to crisis situations, but a bear on hospital grounds was something entirely new. She grabbed her medical bag out of habit and headed toward the rear entrance, her soft-soled shoes making barely a sound on the polished floors. The moment Dr. Vasquez's hand touched the door handle, the mother bear's entire demeanor changed. She rose up on her hind legs to her full height, nearly 7 feet tall, and let out a deep, thunderous roar that echoed through the loading dock and into the hospital corridors. The sound was so powerful that windows vibrated in their frames. Ryan felt his legs go weak. He had never heard anything so primal and terrifying in his life. But what happened next left him completely speechless. The baby in the nursery, 3 floors above and hundreds of feet away from the loading dock, suddenly stopped crying. Not gradually, but instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. Melody looked down at the infant in amazement. The baby's eyes were wide open now, staring toward the window that faced the forest, and there was an alertness in those tiny features that seemed impossible for a newborn. "That's not normal," Melody whispered to herself, checking the baby's vitals again. Heart rate, breathing, temperature. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, actually. The readings were more stable than she had ever seen in a newborn, as if some invisible force was keeping the child completely calm. Dr. Vasquez froze with her hand still on the door handle. Through the small window in the door, she could see Ryan standing motionless, his flashlight beam wavering slightly in his trembling hand. But what made her gasp was the sight of the enormous bear, still standing on her hind legs, staring directly at the door where Dr. Vasquez stood. The bear's eyes weren't filled with aggression or fear. They held something far more unsettling, recognition, as if she knew exactly who was behind that door and was waiting for something specific to happen. "Ryan," Dr. Vasquez spoke softly into her radio, trying not to make any sudden movements. "Can you hear me?" "Yes," came his whispered reply. "But don't come out here. She's not acting like any wild animal I've ever seen." The mother bear slowly lowered herself back to all fours, but her gaze never left the hospital door. Her cub limped over to her side, and she gently nuzzled it with her massive snout. The tenderness of the gesture was heartbreaking, but it was what happened next that made both Ryan and Dr. Vasquez question everything they thought they knew about animal behavior. The mother bear began to move in a specific pattern. She walked 3 steps toward the hospital, then 3 steps back. She repeated this movement exactly 5 times, each sequence identical to the last. It wasn't random pacing. It was deliberate, purposeful, almost ritualistic. "She's trying to communicate," Dr. Vasquez breathed into her radio. Inside the nursery, something even stranger was happening. The baby had turned her head toward the window facing the loading dock, even though she was far too young to have developed the muscle control for such movement. Melody gently turned the baby's head back toward the center of the room, but within seconds, the infant had turned back toward the window. "This is impossible," Melody murmured, her heart racing. She had delivered hundreds of babies and had never seen anything like this. The baby's mother, Sarah Chen, was still unconscious in the ICU after losing significant blood during the complicated delivery. But in her drug-induced sleep, she began to murmur words that made the ICU nurse, Marcus Webb, lean closer to listen. "The woods," Sarah whispered, her eyes still closed. "She's in the woods. The baby. She's calling her." Marcus checked Sarah's chart. She was on heavy pain medication and shouldn't be conscious at all, let alone speaking. He made a note in her file and increased the monitoring frequency. Back at the loading dock, Ryan noticed that the mother bear had stopped her pacing pattern and was now sniffing the air intently. Her nostrils flared, and her head moved back and forth as if she was tracking a specific scent. But the wind was blowing away from the hospital, so whatever she was smelling had to be coming from inside the building. The cub suddenly became agitated, whimpering and pawing at its mother's leg. The mother bear looked down at her injured baby, then back at the hospital, and Ryan could see her internal struggle. She wanted to help her cub, but she also seemed compelled to stay near the hospital for reasons Ryan couldn't understand. Dr. Vasquez had worked with animals before completing her medical degree, and she recognized the signs of an animal in distress. But this was different. The mother bear's behavior suggested she was torn between 2 equally strong instincts, and that internal conflict was making her unpredictable. "Ryan, I'm going to try something," Dr. Vasquez said into her radio. "I want you to stay completely still." Before Ryan could respond, Dr. Vasquez slowly opened the door just a crack. The mother bear immediately focused all her attention on the opening, but she didn't charge a retreat. Instead, she sat down, much like a trained dog would, and waited. "My God," Ryan whispered. "It's like she's been waiting for you." Dr. Vasquez opened the door a few more inches and spoke in a calm, soft voice. "Hello, Mama. I can see your little one is hurt." The mother bear's ears perked up at the gentle tone. She looked down at her cub, then back at Dr. Vasquez, and made a sound that was almost like a question, a low, inquiring grunt. In the nursery, the baby suddenly reached one tiny hand toward the window, her fingers opening and closing as if she was trying to grasp something. Melody had never seen such coordinated movement in a newborn, and it sent chills down her spine. The hospital's night administrator, Patricia Gomez, arrived at the scene after receiving multiple reports of unusual activity. She took one look at the situation and immediately called for backup from the local wildlife authorities, But what she saw next made her question whether this was really a wildlife situation at all. The mother bear had picked up her cub in her mouth as gently as possible and carried it closer to the hospital entrance. She set the little one down directly in front of Dr. Vasquez and then stepped back, as if presenting her injured baby for medical attention. "She wants us to help her cub," Dr. Vasquez said in amazement. "But how could she possibly know we're medical professionals?" Ryan lowered his flashlight and took a small step back to give the bear family more space. As he did, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the soft dirt near the loading dock, alongside the bear's paw prints, were other tracks. Human footprints, small ones, like those of a child. But the strangest part wasn't the prints themselves. It was their age. They looked fresh, made within the last few hours. But there had been no children in the hospital that night. The maternity ward had only one patient, the baby in the nursery, and she had never left the building. "Dr. Vasquez," Ryan said slowly, "I think we need to look at something over here." As Dr. Vasquez carefully made her way toward Ryan, the mother bear watched every movement, but made no attempt to interfere. Her cub lay quietly between them, its injured paw visible in the flashlight beam. But it was what happened next that would change everything they thought they knew about the connection between the bear family and the hospital. The baby in the nursery, still only hours old, let out a sound that made every adult in the building stop what they were doing. It wasn't a cry or a whimper. It was a perfect imitation of the sound the bear cub had been making, a soft, questioning grunt that no human baby should have been able to produce. And in that moment the mother bear answered with the exact same sound, as if she was responding to a call she had been waiting to hear all along. The sound that passed between the newborn baby and the mother bear sent an electric shock through everyone who heard it. Melody's hands trembled as she held the infant, who had now turned her entire body toward the window with impossible strength for someone so. The baby's eyes, which should have been unfocused and cloudy like all newborns, were crystal clear and seemed to be looking directly through the walls toward the loading dock. Dr. Vasquez felt goosebumps rise on her arms. In 20 years of medical practice, she had never witnessed anything that challenged her understanding of science and nature so completely. She knelt down slowly beside the injured cub, her medical instincts overriding her fear. "Easy, little one," she whispered, extending her hand palm up toward the cub. "Let me see that paw." The mother bear watched intently as Dr. Vasquez examined her baby. The cub's front paw was indeed injured, but as Dr. Vasquez gently lifted it to look closer, she gasped. This wasn't a typical wilderness injury from a thorn or sharp rock. There were small, precise cuts on the paw pads, almost surgical in their appearance, and they were far too clean to have been made by anything in the wild. "Ryan," Dr. Vasquez said quietly, "these cuts were made by something very sharp, and recently, within the last 6 to 8 hours. Ryan moved closer with his flashlight, and what he saw made his stomach drop. The cuts formed a pattern, 3 parallel lines that looked almost like claw marks, but they were too perfect, too intentional. Someone or something had deliberately hurt this cub. Meanwhile, in the ICU, Sarah Chen's condition was becoming increasingly strange. Marcus Webb had been monitoring her for hours, and her vital signs were not following any normal post-surgical pattern. Her brain activity was elevated despite the heavy sedatives, and her heart rate kept synchronizing with something that wasn't connected to any of the medical equipment. "Dr. Harrison," Marcus called to the attending physician. "You need to see this." Dr. James A. Harrison looked at the monitors with confusion. Sarah's heart rate was beating in a specific rhythm, 3 quick beats, followed by 2 slower ones, repeated over and over. It was almost like a coded message. Has she been exposed to any unusual medications? Dr. Harrison asked, checking her chart again. Nothing out of the ordinary, Marcus replied. But she keeps murmuring about the woods and about someone named Luna. Dr. Harrison froze. Luna? Did you say Luna? Yes, she said it at least a dozen times in the past hour. Do you know what it means? Dr. Harrison's face went pale. He had worked at Pine Valley Medical Center for 15 years, and there was something about that name that triggered a memory he had tried very hard to forget. He pulled Marcus aside, away from Sarah's bed. There was a case here about 7 years ago, Dr. Harrison said in a low voice. A pregnant woman named Luna Clearwater came in during a terrible storm. She was from the indigenous community up in the mountains, and she was in labor. But something went wrong during delivery, and we lost both her and the baby. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What does that have to do with Sarah? Luna kept saying the same thing Sarah is saying now, about the woods, about something calling to her baby. The night she died, several staff members reported seeing unusual animal activity around the hospital. Bears, wolves, even mountain lions that had never been seen in the area before. Back at the loading dock, Dr. Vasquez was carefully cleaning the cub's wounds when she made another disturbing discovery. Hidden beneath the cub's thick fur, near its shoulder, was a small scar that looked like it had been made by a needle. It was the kind of mark left by an injection, but it was too precise and too healed to be from any recent veterinary care. Someone has been experimenting on this cub, Dr. Vasquez whispered to Ryan. These aren't wild animals. They've had contact with humans before medical contact. The mother bear seemed to understand that Dr. Vasquez was helping her baby, but her attention kept drifting back to the hospital building. She would look toward the loading dock entrance, then up at the windows of the upper floors, as if she was tracking something specific inside the building. In the nursery, Melody was becoming increasingly concerned about the baby's behavior. The infant had not cried once since the bear's roar, which was highly unusual for a newborn. Instead, she seemed to be listening to something that only she could hear. Every few minutes, the baby would make soft sounds, not typical baby noises, but the same grunting communications they had heard between the bears. I need to call someone, Melody said to herself, reaching for the phone. But as her fingers touched the receiver, the baby let out a sharp cry that made Melody jump. It was the first normal baby sound she had made all night, and it came the instant Melody tried to make contact with the outside world. Melody slowly moved her hand away from the phone, and the baby immediately calmed down again. When she reached for the phone a second time, the same thing happened. An immediate, distressed cry that stopped the moment she pulled her hand back. You don't want me to call anyone, do you? Melody whispered to the infant. But why? Patricia Gomez had been trying to contact the state wildlife authorities for over an hour, but she kept encountering the same problem. Every time she dialed the number, the call would connect for a few seconds, and then mysteriously disconnect. Her cell phone, the hospital's landlines, even her personal emergency radio. Nothing was working properly. It's like something is interfering with our communications, she told Ryan over the radio. I've never seen anything like it. Ryan was starting to wonder if the communication problems were related to the bear's presence. He had noticed that his own radio worked fine when he was talking to people inside the hospital, but any attempt to contact outside authorities resulted in static and dropped calls. Dr. Vasquez finished bandaging the cub's paw and sat back on her heels. The little bear looked up at her with intelligent eyes and made a soft sound that seemed almost like a thank you, but it was the mother bear's reaction that truly shocked her. The massive bear approached Dr. Vasquez slowly and gently pressed her large snout against the doctor's shoulder. It was an unmistakably affectionate gesture, the kind of contact that required complete trust. But as the bear's nose touched her jacket, Dr. Vasquez felt something that made her heart race. There was a piece of paper tucked into the bear's thick fur, just behind her left ear. It had been placed there deliberately, protected from the elements by the bear's coat. With trembling fingers, Dr. Vasquez carefully extracted the paper. It was a hospital bracelet, the kind given to patients upon admission. But this bracelet was old, the plastic yellowed with age, and the information printed on it made Dr. Vasquez's blood run cold. Patient, Luna Clearwater. Date, November 15, 2018. Department, Maternity Ward. My God, Dr. Vasquez breathed. Ryan, I think I know why they're here. But before she could explain, a new sound echoed through the forest surrounding the hospital. It was the howl of wolves, but not just one or two. It sounded like an entire pack, and they were getting closer. The mother bear's head snapped up at the sound, and for the first time since the encounter began, she looked genuinely afraid. She gathered her cub close to her body and looked directly at Dr. Vasquez with pleading eyes. Inside the hospital, every animal-related patient sensor and monitoring device began going off simultaneously. The few pets that had been brought in with their injured owners started whimpering and trying to hide. Even the therapy dog that lived at the hospital, a normally calm golden retriever named Max, began pacing nervously and whining at the windows. In the nursery, the baby's behavior became even more extraordinary. She began making a series of different sounds. Not just the bear grunts, but what sounded like bird calls, wolf howls, and other animal communications. It was as if she was speaking multiple animal languages, and each sound was answered from somewhere in the surrounding forest. Melody realized with growing terror that the baby wasn't just communicating with the bears. She was calling to every wild animal in the area, and they were responding. Dr. Harrison burst into the nursery, his face flushed with panic. Melody, we need to move the baby immediately. Sarah Chen's condition has taken a turn, and she's saying things that, well, they don't make sense medically. But given what's happening tonight, I think we need to take them seriously. What kind of things? Melody asked, still holding the unusually calm infant. She keeps saying that her baby isn't entirely human, that during her pregnancy she was visited by spirits from the forest, and they blessed her child with the ability to communicate with all living things. She says the baby is meant to be a bridge between the human and animal worlds. Melody looked down at the infant in her arms, who was gazing back at her with those impossibly clear, intelligent eyes. Dr. Harrison, I think Sarah might be telling the truth. The howling of the wolves grew louder, and now they could hear other sounds as well. The screech of night birds, the chittering of smaller forest creatures, and in the distance, the distinctive bugle call of an elk. It was as if every animal in the Montana wilderness was converging on Pine Valley Medical Center. Outside, the mother bear stood up and began backing toward the forest, her cub cradled in her arms. But she wasn't retreating out of fear of the humans. She was positioning herself between the hospital and whatever was coming through the trees. Dr. Vasquez looked at the hospital bracelet in her hands, then at the bear family, and finally at the dark forest that seemed to pulse with unseen life. She was beginning to understand that tonight's events were connected to something much larger and more ancient than a simple wildlife encounter. Ryan, she said quietly, I don't think we're dealing with ordinary bears, and I don't think that baby upstairs is an ordinary child. As if summoned by her words, a figure emerged from the tree line. It was an elderly Native American woman, walking slowly but steadily toward the loading dock. She wore traditional clothing and carried a staff decorated with feathers and small bones. Her presence seemed to calm the forest sounds, as if the animals recognized her authority. The mother bear immediately relaxed when she saw the woman, lowering her head in what looked like a gesture of respect. The woman approached the bear family and spoke to them in a language that neither Ryan nor Dr. Vasquez recognized, but the bears seemed to understand perfectly. Then the woman turned toward the hospital and spoke in clear English. "You have something that belongs to us," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the loading dock. "A child who was promised to the forest 7 years ago. We have come to collect what was given freely and to fulfill an ancient agreement." Dr. Vasquez felt her world shifting. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, but it was not entirely friendly. "I am Mary Clearwater, Luna's grandmother. And that baby in your hospital is not just Sarah Chen's daughter. She is the reincarnation of Luna's child, the one who was meant to bridge our 2 worlds. The spirits have guided her back to us, and we will not leave without her." Dr. Vasquez felt her legs go weak, but she forced herself to stand straighter. "That's impossible. Sarah Chen has been my patient throughout her entire pregnancy. I've monitored this baby's development from the beginning. There's nothing supernatural about her birth." Mary Clearwater's weathered face showed a mixture of sadness and patience, as if she had expected this denial. "Dr. Vasquez, tell me, did Sarah ever mention the dreams during her pregnancy? Dreams of running through forests on 4 legs, of understanding the language of birds, of feeling her unborn child respond to the calls of wild animals?" Dr. Vasquez's mouth went dry. Sarah had mentioned strange dreams during several appointments, dreams so vivid and detailed that Dr. Vasquez had recommended she speak to a therapist about pregnancy-related anxiety, but she had never connected them to anything beyond normal hormonal changes. "How could you possibly know about that?" Dr. Vasquez whispered. "Because the same spirit that inhabited my granddaughter Luna has been reaching out through dreams, preparing Sarah for what was to come. The baby growing inside her was never fully human, Dr. Vasquez. She carries the essence of the forest, the ability to speak with all living creatures. This is why your equipment cannot contact the outside world tonight, why every animal for miles has been drawn here." Ryan stepped closer, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you can't just waltz in here and claim someone's baby belongs to you. That's kidnapping." Mary Clearwater turned her intense gaze on Ryan, and he felt as if she could see directly into his soul. "Young man, 7 years ago, your hospital failed to save my granddaughter and her child. But death is not always the end, especially when powerful spirits are involved. Luna made a pact with the forest guardians before she died. She offered her soul and her child's soul to protect this land from those who would destroy it, in exchange for the chance to return when the need was greatest." "That's not how medicine works," Dr. Vasquez protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "People don't just reincarnate into other people's babies." "Don't they?" Mary asked quietly. "Then explain to me why Sarah Chen, a woman with no connection to our tribe, chose to give birth on the exact same night that Luna died 7 years ago. Explain why she was drawn to move to this specific town just 3 months into her pregnancy, despite having no family or job prospects here. Explain why her baby can communicate with animals in ways that should be impossible." Dr. Vasquez realized with growing horror that she couldn't explain any of those things. Sarah had indeed moved to the area unexpectedly, and when Dr. Vasquez had asked why, Sarah had simply said she felt called to come here. Inside the hospital, the situation was escalating rapidly. Marcus Webb rushed to find Dr. Harrison after Sarah Chen's condition took another dramatic turn. She had awakened from her sedated state completely, her eyes wide and alert despite the powerful medications in her system. "The grandmother is here," Sarah said, gripping Marcus's arm with surprising strength. I can feel her presence. She's come for my baby, hasn't she? Mrs. Chen, you need to rest, Marcus said, trying to guide her back down to the bed. You've lost a lot of blood and you're on heavy medication. You're hallucinating. No, Sarah said firmly, her voice clearer than it had been since the delivery. I've been having the dreams for months, Marcus. Dreams where I was someone else, someone who died in this very hospital. I know you think I'm crazy, but my baby isn't entirely mine. She belongs to something much older and more powerful than either of us. Dr. Harrison entered the room just in time to hear Sarah's words. Sarah, you're experiencing post-surgical confusion. It's completely normal after what you've been through. Dr. Harrison, Sarah said, turning to face him with eyes that seemed far too knowing. You were here the night Luna Clearwater died, weren't you? You were the one who tried to save her baby. Dr. Harrison's face went ashen. He had never mentioned Luna Clearwater to Sarah, and that information wasn't in any medical files she would have had access to. How do you know that name? He asked quietly. Because I remember dying, Sarah said simply. Not as Sarah Chen, but as Luna Clearwater. I remember the pain, the feeling of my child being lost, and the moment I made the bargain with the forest spirits. They promised that my child would have another chance at life, that she would return to fulfill her destiny as a bridge between the human and animal worlds. Meanwhile, in the nursery, Melody was experiencing something that defied all logic and medical training. The baby had begun to levitate. It was subtle at first, just a slight lifting from the surface of the crib, as if she weighed nothing at all. But as the minutes passed, the infant rose higher, floating peacefully in the air about 6 inches above her blankets. Her eyes were closed, and she appeared to be in a deep, meditative state. This isn't happening, Melody whispered to herself, rubbing her eyes hard. But when she looked again, the baby was still floating, her tiny body surrounded by what looked like a faint silvery glow. The hospital's chief administrator, Elizabeth Hartwell, had been called in due to the unusual reports from the night shift. She arrived to find her staff in various states of panic and confusion, with stories about floating babies, telepathic animals, and mysterious communication disruptions. Everyone just calm down, Elizabeth said firmly. There has to be a rational explanation for all of this. But as she spoke, every piece of electronic equipment in the hospital began to malfunction simultaneously. Lights flickered, computers rebooted randomly, and the elevator started moving between floors with no one pressing the buttons. The backup generators kicked in, then shut off, then kicked in again, as if the building's electrical system was being controlled by an external force. Outside, Mary Clearwater had begun to perform what looked like a ritual. She knelt on the ground near the mother bear and her cub, spreading various items from a leather pouch on the concrete. There were crystals, dried herbs, small animal bones, and what appeared to be old photographs. "What is she doing?" Ryan asked Dr. Vasquez in a low voice. "I think she's trying to prove her claims," Dr. Vasquez replied, though she had no idea how ancient rituals could prove anything about modern medical situations. Mary arranged the items in a specific pattern, then began to chant in her native language. As her voice rose and fell in the ancient rhythm, the forest around them began to respond. The wolf howls grew closer, and other animals started emerging from the tree line. First came a massive elk, its antlers spanning at least 6 feet. Then a family of deer, several raccoons, and what looked like a mountain lion. But instead of being afraid of the humans or aggressive toward each other, all the animals sat quietly around Mary's ritual circle, as if they were participants in some cosmic ceremony. The mother bear gently placed her cub in the center of Mary's arrangement, and the elderly woman began to examine the little bear's injuries. As she touched the surgical scars and injection marks, her expression grew increasingly angry. "These wounds were made by the same people who have been hunting our sacred animals for years," Mary said, her voice carrying clearly to Ryan and Dr. Vasquez. "There is a research facility hidden in these mountains, one that your government doesn't officially recognize. They capture animals with spiritual significance and perform experiments on them, trying to understand the connection between the natural and supernatural worlds." Dr. Vasquez felt a chill of recognition. During her veterinary training, she had heard rumors about classified research programs that studied unusual animal behaviors, but she had always assumed they were conspiracy theories. "That's why Luna's child had to return," Mary continued. "The balance between our worlds is being destroyed by those who seek to exploit spiritual power for their own gain. Only a being who can communicate with both humans and animals can expose their crimes and restore the natural order." Inside the hospital, the floating baby had begun to glow more brightly, and the light seemed to be pulsing in rhythm with something outside. Melody realized that the baby's heartbeat was synchronizing with the chanting they could hear faintly through the windows. "Dr. Harrison," Melody called over the intercom. "You need to see this immediately." When Dr. Harrison arrived at the nursery, he stopped dead in his tracks. The floating infant was now surrounded by what looked like small points of light, dancing around her like fireflies. But these weren't insects. They were pure energy, swirling in patterns that seemed to respond to the baby's movements. "Get the camera, Doctor," Harrison whispered. "No one is going to believe this without documentation." But every time someone tried to photograph or record the phenomenon, their devices would malfunction. Cameras would shut off. Phones would restart. And even simple pen and paper seemed to resist any attempt to document what was happening. "She doesn't want to be recorded," Melody realized. "Somehow, she's preventing us from creating any evidence of this." Sarah Chen appeared in the nursery doorway, having somehow left her bed despite her condition. She was pale and unsteady, but her eyes were fixed on her floating daughter with a mixture of awe and resignation. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Sarah said softly. "I knew from the moment she was conceived that she was special. The dreams, the visions, the way forest animals would approach me during my pregnancy, it all makes sense now." "Sarah, you shouldn't be out of bed," Dr. Harrison protested. "I'm not going to live through the night," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "My body is failing, because it was only meant to carry her into this world, not to raise her. Just like Luna Clearwater, I'm going to die so that she can live and fulfill her purpose." Dr. Harrison checked Sarah's vital signs and was horrified to discover that she was right. Despite all their medical interventions, her body was shutting down in ways that made no medical sense. "We can save you," he insisted. "Emergency surgery, blood transfusions, whatever it takes." Sarah smiled sadly. "Dr. Harrison, some things are beyond medicine. I accepted this fate the moment I agreed to carry Luna's spirit child. My only request is that you let me hold her one more time before I go." As if responding to her mother's words, the baby slowly descended from her floating position and settled gently into Melody's arms. The lights around her dimmed but didn't disappear completely, and her eyes opened to look directly at Sarah. "Hello, my precious one," Sarah whispered, taking the infant from Melody. "I know you're not really mine, but I'm honored to have been chosen to bring you back into this world." The baby made a soft cooing sound, and Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I can hear her," she said in wonder. "Not with my ears, but in my mind. She's thanking me, and she's promising that my sacrifice won't be forgotten." Outside, Mary Clearwater had finished her ritual, and the assembled animals began to move toward the hospital in a slow, purposeful procession. The mother bear picked up her now-healed cub. Somehow the ritual had completely mended its injuries, and joined the parade of creatures. "They're coming for her," Ryan said, watching the approaching animals with a mixture of fear and fascination. Dr. Vasquez nodded, finally accepting that this night had moved far beyond anything science could explain. "The question is, are we going to try to stop them?" Before Ryan could answer, Elizabeth Hartwell's voice crackled over the hospital's intercom system, though no one had seen her go to the control room. "Attention all staff," Elizabeth's voice said, but it sounded different somehow, older and more authoritative. "Please clear the main corridor from the rear entrance to the nursery. We have special visitors who need safe passage." Ryan and Dr. Vasquez looked at each other in confusion. Elizabeth had been skeptical of all the night's events just minutes before. What could have changed her mind so dramatically? As they watched, Elizabeth appeared in the loading dock doorway, but she wasn't alone. Standing behind her was another elderly Native American woman, this one even older than Mary Clearwater, wearing traditional tribal regalia that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. "This is Elder Catherine Brightfeather," Elizabeth announced, though her voice still had that strange, distant quality. "She has come to witness the reunion of the forest child with her true family." Dr. Vasquez realized with growing shock that Elizabeth's eyes had changed color. Instead of their normal brown, they were now a deep, silvery gray, the same color as the light surrounding the baby. "Elizabeth," Dr. Vasquez called out. "Are you feeling all right?" Elizabeth turned toward her with a serene smile. "I'm feeling perfectly clear for the first time in years, Dr. Vasquez. The forest spirits have been trying to communicate with us for so long, and tonight, finally, we can hear them." It was becoming clear that whatever supernatural forces were at work tonight, they weren't just affecting the baby and the animals. They were changing the humans as well, opening their minds to possibilities that had always existed but had been ignored or forgotten. As the procession of animals entered the hospital, led by Mary Clearwater and the mother bear, Dr. Vasquez faced the most important decision of her career. She could try to protect what she saw as a human baby from what others claimed was her spiritual destiny, or she could trust in forces beyond her understanding and allow this ancient story to reach its intended conclusion. In the nursery, Sarah Chen was growing weaker by the minute, but she continued to hold her daughter close. "Promise me something," she whispered to the baby. "Promise me that you'll use your gifts to protect all living things, human and animal alike. Don't let the people who hurt that bear cub succeed in their plans." The baby's response came not as a sound, but as a warm, golden light that enveloped both mother and child. And in that light, everyone in the room could feel the presence of something vast and ancient and impossibly loving, a force that transcended the boundaries between species, between life and death, between the physical and spiritual worlds. The reunion that was about to take place would change everything, not just for the people in Pine Valley Medical Center, but for the entire relationship between humanity and the natural world. The forest child had returned, and her time of destiny was finally at hand. As the procession of animals made their way through the hospital corridors, something extraordinary happened. Every patient in the building began to experience spontaneous healing. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been in a coma for 3 weeks following a stroke, suddenly opened her eyes and spoke her first coherent words since her accident. Tommy Fletcher, a 7-year-old boy with leukemia, felt his fever break and his energy return in ways that defied all medical explanation. Dr. Harrison watched in amazement as his patient's monitor showed impossible improvements across the board. Cancer markers dropping to normal levels, broken bones mending at visible rates, infections clearing up without antibiotics. It was as if the baby's presence was radiating healing energy throughout the entire facility. "This is medically impossible," he whispered to himself, but the evidence was undeniable. In the nursery, Sarah Chen's condition continued to deteriorate, but her face showed only peace and acceptance. The baby in her arms was no longer glowing, but the air around them still shimmered with an otherworldly presence. "I can see her," Sarah whispered to Melody, who stayed close by to monitor her vital signs. "Luna Clearwater. She's standing right behind you, and she looks exactly like I do. We're connected, Melody, two souls who shared the same sacred purpose." Melody turned around, but saw nothing. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone in the room, and the temperature had dropped several degrees despite the heating system working perfectly. The procession had reached the elevator, but instead of waiting for it to arrive, Elder Catherine Brightfeather simply placed her hand on the closed doors, and they opened immediately. The animals filed into the elevator car with remarkable order. The massive elk somehow fitting despite the impossible logistics, the mountain lion calmly sitting beside the family of deer, and the mother bear cradling her fully healed cub. Ryan and Dr. Vasquez followed, though every instinct told them they were witnessing something that would change their understanding of reality forever. As the elevator rose toward the third floor, Elder Catherine spoke for the first time. "Dr. Vasquez, you have been chosen as a witness because your heart is pure and your dedication to healing is genuine. What you see tonight must be remembered and shared, but only when the time is right. There are forces working against the natural world that must be exposed, but they are powerful and dangerous." "The research facility Mary mentioned," Dr. Vasquez said. "Is it real?" "More real than you can imagine," Elder Catherine replied. "For decades, they have been capturing animals with spiritual significance, trying to extract and synthesize the essence that allows communication between species. They believe they can create super soldiers who can control animals for military purposes." Ryan felt his stomach turn. "That's why the cub was injured. They were experimenting on it." "Yes," Elder Catherine confirmed. "But the forest spirits protected that little one, guiding it and its mother to this place at the exact moment when the child would be born. Everything is connected, Mr. Blackwood. Nothing that has happened tonight is coincidence." The elevator doors opened to reveal a shocking scene. The entire third floor had been transformed. Where there had once been sterile hospital corridors, now there were trees growing through the floors, their branches reaching toward the ceiling. Flowers bloomed from the walls, and a gentle stream of water flowed down the hallway, creating a path toward the nursery. "What happened to our hospital?" Ryan asked in amazement. Mary Clearwater, who had somehow arrived ahead of them despite taking the stairs, smiled as she walked along the stream. "The veil between worlds is thin tonight. The forest is reclaiming what was always its sacred ground. This hospital was built on an ancient gathering place where our people came to communicate with the animal spirits." Dr. Vasquez knelt down and touched the water flowing through the hallway. It was warm and seemed to sparkle with the same light they had seen around the baby. As her fingers made contact with the stream, she suddenly understood things that had never made sense before. "The healing," she said in wonder. "It's not just the baby. This whole area is sacred ground. That's why we've always had such good success rates here, why patients recover faster than they should. The land itself has healing properties. And that's precisely why the research facility wanted to build here," Elder Catherine said grimly. "They know the power of this place, and they want to harness it for their own purposes. The baby's return is the Earth's way of protecting itself." As they approached the nursery, they could hear Sarah Chen's voice, though it was growing weaker. She was singing a lullaby in a language that none of the medical staff recognized, but the melody was hauntingly beautiful and seemed to resonate through the transformed hospital corridors. Inside the nursery, something impossible was happening. Sarah was no longer alone with her baby. Standing beside her bed was the translucent figure of a young Native American woman, Luna Clearwater herself, or at least her spirit. "I can see her now, too," Melody whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's beautiful." Luna's spirit looked exactly like Sarah, but younger and wearing traditional Native American clothing. She was reaching out toward the baby, and as her ghostly fingers touched the infant's forehead, both mother and child began to glow with the same golden light. "It's time," Luna's spirit said, her voice echoing as if it came from a great distance. "The transfer must be completed before the physical body fails." Sarah nodded weakly and lifted the baby toward Luna's spirit. "Take her. She was always meant to be yours." But as the spiritual transfer began, alarms started blaring throughout the hospital. Not medical alarms, these were security alerts. The building's automated systems were detecting unauthorized entry, and the computerized voice announced, "Multiple breaches detected." Lockdown protocol initiated. Through the nursery windows, they could see vehicles approaching the hospital at high speed. Black SUVs with tinted windows and no license plates, moving with military precision. The research facility had discovered the location of their escaped test subjects and the spiritual child they had been hunting for years. "They're here," Mary Clearwater said grimly, entering the nursery with the procession of animals. "The ones who have been desecrating sacred ground and torturing innocent creatures. They cannot be allowed to take the child." The mother bear positioned herself protectively in front of the nursery door, and the other animals spread throughout the room, forming a living barrier around Sarah's bed. The elk's massive antlers blocked the main window, and the mountain lion crouched in front of the secondary entrance. Elder Catherine began chanting in her native language, and the hospital's lights flickered and dimmed. But instead of leaving them in darkness, the room filled with the warm, golden glow emanating from the baby and Luna's spirit. "Dr. Vasquez," Elder Catherine said urgently, "you must choose now. Will you help us protect this child and expose the crimes being committed against the natural world, or will you stand aside and let them take her for their experiments?" Before Dr. Vasquez could answer, the sound of helicopters filled the air outside. Searchlights swept across the hospital grounds, and armed figures could be seen rappelling from the aircraft onto the hospital roof. "They're not just coming through the front door," Ryan observed grimly. "This is a full-scale military operation." Sarah Chen's vital signs were becoming critical, but she continued to hold her baby close. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "don't let them separate us. Luna and I have waited 7 years for this moment." The spiritual transfer between Luna's ghost and the baby was intensifying. The golden light around them grew brighter, and the air in the room began to shimmer like heat waves. But instead of just affecting the baby, the light was beginning to change everyone present. Melody felt her consciousness expanding, suddenly able to understand the thoughts and emotions of every animal in the room. The mother bear's fierce protectiveness, the elk's ancient wisdom, the mountain lion's predatory alertness. She could feel it all as if these emotions were her own. Ryan experienced something similar, but his connection was to the hospital building itself. He could sense the approach of the armed intruders, feel their heavy boots on the stairs, detect their weapons and equipment as if the building's security systems had become part of his own nervous system. Dr. Vasquez found herself connected to the very essence of healing energy that flowed through the sacred ground beneath them. She could feel the pain of every injured animal in the surrounding forest, sense the damage being done by the secret experiments, and understand with crystal clarity how the research facility's work was disrupting the natural balance of the entire region. The child is awakening our dormant abilities, Elder Catherine explained, though her words seemed to come from inside their minds rather than through their ears. Humanity once had these connections to the natural world, but they were lost over centuries of separation from the earth. Tonight, they are being restored. The sound of breaking glass came from the floor below, followed by shouts and the heavy footsteps of tactical teams. The intruders were moving through the hospital with ruthless efficiency, and they would reach the nursery within minutes. But something was slowing them down. The transformed hospital corridors, with their streams and growing trees, were confusing their equipment and disrupting their communications. Several of the tactical team members were reporting that their GPS devices were malfunctioning, and their radios were picking up strange signals that sounded like animal calls. "The forest is fighting back," Mary Clearwater said with satisfaction. "The spirits are protecting their child." Luna's ghostly form was becoming more solid as the spiritual transfer continued, while Sarah's physical body grew more transparent. They were essentially switching places. Luna's spirit was entering the physical world, while Sarah's soul prepared to join the ancestral realm. "I can see everything now," Sarah said, her voice taking on the same distant, echoing quality as Luna's had. "The research facility, their plans, the animals they've captured. They have a whole underground complex built into the mountain, and they're planning to use the baby's abilities to create a new form of biological warfare." "What kind of warfare?" Dr. Vasquez asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "They want to breed animals that can carry diseases specifically designed to target certain genetic markers," Sarah explained, her form becoming increasingly translucent. "They believe that if they can control animal behavior through the baby's abilities, they can use those animals as delivery systems for targeted biological weapons." The implications were horrifying. An army of infected animals controlled by human operators could deliver custom-designed plagues to specific populations while leaving others untouched. It was biological warfare taken to a completely new and terrifying level. "That's why the forest spirits brought her back," Luna's now solid form explained, holding the baby, who was no longer glowing but seemed perfectly normal despite everything happening around her. "Not just to restore the connection between humans and animals, but to prevent this perversion of natural harmony from being used as a weapon." The tactical teams had reached the second floor, but their progress was slowing even more. Hospital staff throughout the building were reporting that the armed intruders seemed confused and disoriented. Some were wandering in circles despite having detailed building blueprints. Others were claiming that the hallways were changing configuration, and several had become separated from their teams in areas that should have been impossible to get lost in. "The building itself is protecting us," Ryan realized, feeling the hospital systems responding to his thoughts. "I can sense their locations, redirect their movements, even lock doors remotely. It's like the entire structure has become alive." Elizabeth Hartwell's voice came over the intercom system again, but now it carried the authority of ancient wisdom rather than administrative efficiency. "All patients and non-essential staff are to remain in their rooms. The sacred ceremony in progress must not be disturbed. Those who come seeking to harm the forest child will find only confusion and failure." In the nursery, the transformation was reaching its climax. Sarah Chen's physical form faded away completely, but her spirit remained visible, standing beside Luna, who now appeared fully corporeal and was holding the baby with natural maternal instincts. "The child now carries the memories and knowledge of both incarnations," Elder Catherine explained. "She will remember her time as Luna's daughter and her brief experience as Sarah's baby. This dual existence will give her the wisdom to navigate both the spiritual and physical worlds. But their moment of triumph was interrupted by an explosion from somewhere in the hospital. The tactical teams had apparently decided to use more aggressive methods to reach their target. "They're destroying the building," Ryan said, feeling the damage through his connection to the hospital's systems. "They don't care about the other patients." The animals in the nursery responded to this threat with coordinated action. The mother bear let out a roar that shook the windows, and every animal in the building answered with their own calls. The sound was deafening, primal, and carried with it a message that transcended language. The natural world was declaring war on those who would abuse its children. Dr. Vasquez made her decision. "I'm with you," she said firmly to Elder Catherine. "Tell me what I need to do to stop them." "Use your connection to the healing energy," Elder Catherine instructed. "Channel it not just to heal, but to protect. The same force that mends broken bones can strengthen walls. The same energy that cures disease can disable weapons." Dr. Vasquez closed her eyes and reached out with her newfound abilities. She could feel the tactical teams throughout the building, their weapons, their equipment, their intentions. With focused concentration, she began to drain the power from their devices. Radios went silent, night vision goggles shut down, and electronic targeting systems failed. But the intruders adapted quickly. They switched to backup equipment and continued their advance, now relying on old-fashioned tactics and determination rather than high-tech advantages. "They're almost here," Ryan warned, sensing the nearest team just one floor below. "Whatever we're going to do, it has to be now." Luna looked down at the baby in her arms, and for the first time that night the infant opened her eyes and looked directly at the approaching threat. When she did, her gaze held a wisdom and intelligence that was far beyond anything possible in a newborn. The baby opened her mouth and made a sound that was unlike anything any of them had ever heard. It wasn't a cry or a call, it was a command, spoken in a language that predated human speech, that reached into the very foundations of natural law. And every living thing within a 50-mile radius heard it and responded. The forest came alive in ways that defied imagination. Trees began to move, their roots breaking through the hospital's foundation and wrapping around the building like protective arms. Vines shot through the walls, creating barriers that no human could penetrate. Animals poured out of the wilderness. Not just the large predators, but thousands of smaller creatures. Birds, squirrels, rabbits, even insects, all moving with unified purpose toward the hospital. But most remarkably, the patients throughout the building began to change. The healing energy that had been flowing through them since the baby's birth was now transforming them into something more than human. They developed enhanced senses, increased strength, and an intuitive understanding of the natural world around them. Mrs. Rodriguez, the stroke patient who had awakened earlier, stood up from her bed with newfound vigor and began speaking to the family of raccoons that had somehow entered her room through a window that had previously been sealed shut. Tommy Fletcher, the boy with leukemia, found that he could communicate with the therapy dog, Max, and coordinate with him to help evacuate elderly patients to safety. The tactical teams found themselves facing not just a transformed building and an army of wild animals, but a hospital full of patients who had suddenly become protectors of the forest child. It was no longer a mission to capture a valuable asset. It had become a battle between two fundamentally different visions of what the relationship between humanity and nature should be. And in the center of it all, the baby who had started as Sarah Chen's daughter and was now fully Luna's reborn child continued to orchestrate the defense with a wisdom that spanned lifetimes and connected all living things in a web of mutual protection and understanding that would reshape the world forever. The first tactical team to reach the third floor found themselves facing something that their extensive training had never prepared them for. As they rounded the corner toward the nursery, the hospital corridor had completely transformed into what looked like an ancient forest pathway. Massive oak trees stretched their branches across the ceiling, their roots creating natural barriers that channeled the armed intruders into specific paths. "Command, this is Alpha Team," the squad leader whispered into his radio. "The building layout doesn't match our blueprints. Repeat, the interior has been completely altered." But his radio only crackled with static, occasionally punctuated by what sounded like wolf howls and bird calls. Unknown to the tactical teams, every electronic communication they attempted was being intercepted and translated by the patients throughout the hospital, who had developed an intuitive understanding of electronic signals as part of their transformation. Tommy Fletcher sat in his hospital bed, his small hands pressed against the wall, his eyes closed in concentration. The leukemia that had ravaged his body for months was completely gone, replaced by an energy that connected him to every electrical circuit in the building. "They're trying to call for backup," Tommy whispered to Mrs. Rodriguez, who was standing guard at his door with a family of raccoons arranged around her like tiny sentries. "But I'm making their signals sound like animal calls to their commanders. They think the teams are just reporting wildlife encounters." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled, her stroke-damaged brain now functioning better than it ever had before the accident. "Good boy, Tommy. Keep them confused while we prepare our defenses." The enhanced patients weren't just developing supernatural abilities. They were organizing themselves with military precision that rivaled their attackers. Mr. Davidson, a construction worker who had been hospitalized after a fall, found that his connection to the building's structure allowed him to reshape walls and doorways at will. He was creating a maze that would trap the intruders while providing escape routes for the hospital staff. In the research facility's mobile command center, positioned 3 miles from the hospital, Dr. Victor Kriegsman watched the tactical feeds with growing frustration. A tall, gaunt man with cold gray eyes, he had spent the last 15 years developing what he called Project Genesis, the systematic capture and experimentation on spiritually significant animals. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're losing contact with all ground teams. Their reports are becoming increasingly incoherent." Dr. Kriegsman leaned forward, studying the thermal imaging displays that showed the hospital building. "Those aren't incoherent reports, Lieutenant. Those are accurate descriptions of what they're encountering. The forest child has awakened, and she's using abilities we've only theorized about." Behind Dr. Kriegsman stood a figure that would have horrified anyone from the hospital if they could have seen him. Dr. Marcus Webb, the ICU nurse who had been monitoring Sarah Chen, was also present in the command center. But this wasn't the caring medical professional the hospital staff knew. This was a spy who had been placed in Pine Valley Medical Center specifically to monitor for signs of spiritual awakening. "The subject is more powerful than our projections indicated," the false Marcus Webb reported. "She's not just communicating with animals, she's enhancing human consciousness and transforming the physical environment. If we don't contain her within the next hour, her influence will spread beyond our ability to control." Dr. Kriegsman nodded grimly. "Initiate Protocol 7. Release the enhanced subjects." Back in the hospital, the real Marcus Webb was experiencing his own transformation. As he helped evacuate patients from the lower floors, he discovered that he could sense the emotional state of every person in the building. The fear, hope, determination, and love flowing through the hospital felt like a symphony that he could both hear and conduct. "Something's wrong," he said suddenly to Dr. Harrison, who was helping move critical care patients to safer areas. "There's someone in this building who doesn't belong, someone whose emotions feel artificial." Dr. Harrison paused in his work. What do you mean, artificial? Like they're pretending to feel things they don't actually experience, Marcus explained, closing his eyes to focus on the strange sensation. It's coming from the nursery area, but that's impossible. Everyone up there is genuine. What Marcus didn't realize was that the false Marcus Webb had left behind a sophisticated recording device that was mimicking human biorhythms and emotional patterns. The device was designed to monitor the spiritual awakening process and transmit data back to the research facility, but Marcus's enhanced abilities were detecting the technological deception. In the nursery, Luna held her reborn daughter close, while the animals maintained their protective positions around the room. But the baby's eyes had taken on an urgent expression, and she was making soft sounds that seemed directed at Elder Catherine. She's trying to warn us about something, Elder Catherine said, listening carefully to the infant's communications. The ones who are coming aren't just ordinary soldiers. They have enhanced subjects with them, animals that have been corrupted by their experiments. Mary Clearwater's face darkened with anger. They're using our sacred brothers and sisters as weapons against us. As if summoned by her words, an inhuman howl echoed through the forest surrounding the hospital. But this wasn't the call of a wild wolf. It was something twisted, wrong, filled with pain and artificial rage. Through the nursery windows they could see shapes moving between the trees. Animals that had once been beautiful and wild, now bearing scars from surgical procedures and electronic implants that glowed with unnatural light. Wolves with metal plates grafted to their skulls, bears with mechanical limbs replacing natural ones, eagles with cameras mounted where their eyes should have been. "Dear God," Dr. Vasquez whispered, "what have they done to those poor creatures?" "They've tried to create the opposite of what the forest child represents," Elder Catherine explained sadly. "Instead of natural harmony between species, they've forced technological control. Those animals are in constant agony, their natural instincts suppressed by electronic impulses." The baby in Luna's arms began to cry for the first time since her spiritual transformation. But these weren't the cries of an infant. They were the grief-stricken laments of an ancient soul, witnessing the perversion of everything she held sacred. Her cries had an immediate effect on the approaching enhanced animals. Several of them stopped in their tracks, their mechanical implants sparking and smoking as the baby's pure emotional frequency overloaded their artificial control systems. The wolves began to shake their heads violently, trying to dislodge the devices that were causing them pain. "She's freeing them," Ryan realized, feeling the baby's influence through his connection to the hospital's systems. "The same energy that's enhancing us is disrupting their control implants." But not all of the enhanced animals could be freed so easily. The ones with more extensive modifications continued their approach, driven by programming that overrode their natural instincts. Leading them was a massive grizzly bear that was more machine than animal. Its entire left side had been replaced with mechanical components, and its eyes had been replaced with cameras that transmitted everything it saw back to Dr. Kriegsman's command center. The mother bear in the nursery sensed the approach of her corrupted cousin and let out a roar of challenge. But this wasn't just territorial aggression. It was a declaration of war between the natural world and those who would enslave it. "We need to get the baby out of here," Dr. Vasquez said urgently. "If those things reach the nursery—" "No," Luna said firmly. "This is exactly where she needs to be. The forest child doesn't run from corruption, she heals it." As the enhanced animals reached the hospital building, they began their assault with terrifying efficiency. The mechanical grizzly bear smashed through the reinforced glass of the main entrance, its metal claws leaving deep gouges in the walls. The modified wolves spread out to surround the building, while the cybernetic eagles provided aerial surveillance for the human tactical teams. But the hospital's defenders were ready for them. The enhanced patients had taken positions throughout the building, and they fought with abilities that defied human limitations. Mrs. Rodriguez commanded her raccoon allies to sabotage the Eagle's camera systems, while Tommy Fletcher used his electronic connection to overload the control signals being sent to the modified animals. Mr. Davidson reshaped the hospital's interior in real time, creating pitfalls and barriers that trapped the enhanced animals while protecting the patients and staff. His construction experience, combined with his new supernatural abilities, allowed him to turn the building itself into a living fortress. In the basement, hospital maintenance worker Carlos Mendoza discovered that his connection to the building's infrastructure extended to the underground water and electrical systems. He could sense the network of tunnels and pipes that ran beneath the hospital, and through them he detected something that made his blood run cold.